Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Hello and welcome to Soul Talk. This is Leora Mandel. I'll be joined with Rabbi David Aaron after the break. I don't think there's anyone who hasn't gone through a time in their life where they really felt a sense of hopelessness, of despair, of how is this ever going to change? How is this ever going to get better? And it's very, very difficult place to be when you feel like you're in a situation where it's just hard to have a sense of hope. It's hard to have a sense of optimism. You start feeling so stuck. And I think we've all been there at some point in our life. And I think we've also been close to other people. I mean, it can go in two sides. When I'm going through this is very painful and difficult. Or if someone that I know or that I love is going through a time where they're just so stuck, they're in such despair, they're in a depression, they can't see any sense of how could my life ever change? How can this situation ever change? How can this ever get better? And it's difficult when you're trying to support a person. You're not maybe in that crisis yourself. You're a bit outside of it, and yet you care for this person and you want them to have some sense of hope, some sense of optimism, something to hold on to help them get out of this deep, dark hole that they're in. What can I do to help my friend, to help my family member, to help someone I care for and love to get out of this despair? Whether we're going through this now or we've gone through it in the past, part of life is sometimes being in situations where we do feel stuck. The question is, what can we do to make sure we don't stay stuck? What do we do to maintain a sense of hope, to find some sense of hope in challenging situations, situations of crisis, situations where we really feel stuck? And as we all know, the longer we stay in that place of feeling stuck and feeling like we're just lost and feeling like this can never change, sometimes the harder it is to get out. But life sometimes brings us with things that are unexpected, with crises, with challenges that we just get lost in. We don't know how to get ourselves out. So what can we do? And this is exactly what I do want to talk with Rabbi Aaron after the break, of understanding and learning from the rabbi, what are some of the tools and techniques that we can use? What are perspectives that we can have? And then how to take those perspectives and put them into practice so that when we are in a place where we're feeling down, we're feeling stuck, we're feeling like maybe there's no hope, we're feeling a sense of despair, or with someone else who is in that situation, what can we do to change things for the better? How can we help ourselves get out? When we return, Soul Talk, Rabbi David Aaron and Leora Mandel.
Israel is located in one of the most volatile areas in the world. Israel is an island of stability in a sea of war and unrest. In the midst of this turmoil, Israel stands out as a beacon of order and human progress. Each week we update you on what's happening in this, the Jewish state, a true light unto the nations. This is Jay Shapiro. Join me every Thursday on Israel News Talk Radio.
Welcome to Soul Talk. This is Leora Mandel with Rabbi David Aaron. Rabbi Aaron, sometimes it can be so hard to keep a positive mindset. And I think the general situation with Corona and endless lockdowns and people getting sick is definitely a time period that so many are facing different challenges where it's hard to keep a sense of optimism. Sometimes it's hard to have hope, whether it be because someone's going through a health crisis where the question is, am I going to make it out of this? Will I get better? Or maybe it's the question mark of knowing something's wrong, you don't feel good, and not having an answer as to why and not a solution as to how to feel better. Whether it's a financial crisis, sometimes we end up in situations, relationship crises, where it can just be hard to maintain a sense of hope that things can actually get better, and how to maintain a sense of some positive perspective while going through the challenge. I know especially as a rabbi and helping so many people, what are tools that people can use who are going through some sort of a challenge or crisis that can help us not lose focus, not despair, and maintain some sense of hope?
Right. So the other day, someone gifted us a little plant with daffodils. And it didn't have any daffodils. Actually, we just got it the other day. And it's really quite extraordinary because you actually see it grow, which I've never really seen a flower grow other than maybe on some video from some speed film or whatever they call it. But you actually, with every little while look at it, it's actually transforming before my very eyes. And I'm literally seeing these flowers growing. And and they're just stunning. They're just so beautiful. These little yellow daffodils. And I say to myself, the same creator that created this incredibly beautiful daffodil has created life in general and runs the world. And I think we have to keep that perspective and also have the humility to understand that we are not going to see the big picture. And so we only see a very small, a very small segment of the picture. And I think from a Torah point of view, this concept of trusting in God, very often people confuse that to think that I trust God that he will bring me what I want. But that's not trusting God, because how do I know what I want is what I need? And maybe it's what I need right now, but maybe it's something that will not be so in my best interest much later. So we trusting God means I completely surrender to the wisdom of the Creator, that he knows what he's doing, he knows what I need, and I just have to be patient. And so I think hope is when people hope that things are going to work out the way they want it to work out, then we set ourselves up for disappointment, and we think that God has to follow our plans. But if hope means that we trust that the master of the universe knows what he's doing, and the ultimate good is on its way, but it might not be the timing that I like and might not look the way I thought it might look, then a person trusts in God and they patiently wait.
This is such an important point, because as you're talking, I'm thinking it's true. If I say something's good, it's by my definition of good. So when I say something is bad, it's really what I'm saying is I don't see the good in it. I'm thinking, we've talked about this before, like if I'm breaking a sweat and I'm feeling really uncomfortable, I might say this is great because it shows that my heart's pumping, I'm exercising, and I'm burning calories. But I may see it as bad because I'm working way too hard, and why am I on a hot, it's perspective. But this point of what you're saying here is that sometimes that we have to recognize that not everything's going to work out the way we want it to. And we have our own definitions of what we think is good for us, but recognizing that God has a different plan and a different sense of what is good, even if in the moment we're not feeling it, is really a huge thing.
Right. I mean, when I was in my early 20s, I got engaged to a woman, and I thought she was my soulmate. And we went to meet the family and announce to them that we're getting married. But the mother especially was dead against this wedding, and she separated us, and she put her foot down, and my fiance didn't have the strength to say no to her mother, which was not so healthy, and in the end we broke up, and I was devastated by it, and I was pained by it for probably a year. But now that I look back at the story, I can't even imagine how foolish I was to think that this was an appropriate mate for me. But at the time, it felt so bad. And now looking at it, I see what an incredible gift that this mother gave me, that she stopped this, because it really wasn't a good match. So there's things that are happening in our lives that at the time looks just so terrible. It's really surrendering to the master of the universe and being incredibly patient and humble. That how do I know what I think is good for me is good for me in the biggest sense of the word.
The perspective is important to remind ourselves that we're in the midst of our story and we don't always get a chance to see the whole picture. And like even in your story, sometimes it can take years, then you can look back and see how what felt bad actually was good. But when we're feeling bad in the moment, we don't have time on, the time ahead of us hasn't happened yet. And I think God gives us these gifts where sometimes in our lives, he does give us these opportunities to look back and see how what felt bad actually was good. And sometimes we won't necessarily have that in our lifetime, but because even our lifetime is one segment of a much larger picture of what's going on for us and for our soul.
Exactly.
So this is the perspective part is huge, and it's so true that if we can take a step back from what we're going through and keep proper perspective, recognizing we're not seeing the whole picture here, we're in the midst of it. There's God has a different understanding of what's good for us, even if I can't see it right now. But so often, I think when we feel so stuck and we're losing hope, there's this whole emotional component that even if in my mind I am maybe clear on some of these thoughts, I don't know the whole picture. It's so hard sometimes to make that connection between what I can tell myself in my head when everything's fine, even if I have the proper perspective, versus what I'm feeling emotionally when I'm going through this challenging situation.
Yeah, Rabbi Nachman of Bretzlev, he has really wonderful advice. He says that every day and every hour has its service, its work. And if you focus on the day and the hour, then you'll get through it. But very often when people are going through challenges, they try to ask themselves, how am I going to get through this? And you don't have to figure out how to get through it. You have to figure out what to do today. And you take it day by day. And very often something of great challenge faces us, and we think we're going to tackle it all at once, but you're not going to tackle it at once. That's the secret of time, that things come hour by hour, day by day, and I think if a person focuses on, let me just get through this day. Actually somebody recently called me up and shared this very issue of losing hope. And I said, just find one small thing you can do to kickstart your movement. It's like you have a car and it's conked out in the middle of the highway. And, right now, what you need to do is get it moving. It doesn't matter what direction. Just get it moving. Rav Kook, he describes happiness as movement. And not always does it have to be movement in any particular direction, but just movement itself is something that can help us get happy. And, and I say to, people that talk to me about depression, and I say, the most important thing to do is keep moving. It doesn't matter where you're moving to. Just keep moving. Just don't go to bed. Just go for a walk. Force yourself to go for a walk. Even better if you could go for a run. Even better if you could put on music and dance. But people lose hope because sometimes they have just too high expectations of accomplishing or looking at what's devastating them and trying to deal with it all now. And you can't deal with it all now. But what you can do is break it down into bite-size, packets and say, so what can I do today? And just focus on what you can do today to move yourself forward.
That is so powerful about moving. And when you're talking about moving, it sounds like you're saying just even physically move, as you said, take a walk, or even better if you can run. And that makes sense in a sense, because I think whenever we say, like someone's in despair, there's often this description of, I feel stuck. I feel stuck emotionally, or, I feel stuck in this situation. How am I ever going to get out? And so the antidote to feeling stuck, as you're saying, is if you don't want to feel stuck, you have to make sure in some aspect of your life you're moving.
That's right. Even if you're not going anywhere, just go for a walk. But the worst thing to do, because movement affects the emotions. Judaism teaches that behavior has a direct impact on how we feel. Now, feelings can generate behavior, but behavior can also generate feelings. And so, so a person should, at the very least, when they're feeling hopeless and helpless, they shouldn't try and figure out how to fix their entire life today, but how to just move. And if they could move forward in the direction they want to get to, great, but it's always step by step. That's the beauty about walking. Wherever you get to, you always got there one step at a time. And nobody gets there without taking one step at a time.
And I think that's such a powerful idea because it is one step at a time. I think when we're feeling overwhelmed and feeling despair, it's because we're looking at such a big mountain and we feel like, how am I ever going to get up here? And when we can break it down into a bite-sized piece of, I don't have to get all the way up to the mountain. I just need to take one step today and one step tomorrow, and I'll get as far as I can. The whole picture changes. When we return, Soul Talk, Rabbi David Aaron and Leora Mandel.
The Tamar Yona Show.
Tamar? She's sassy.
She's smart.
She's funny.
But she's also a real Jewish mother.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tamar Yona. And yes, I can be all of those things. But at Israel News Talk Radio, I'm here to bring you the news stories and guests that you may not hear anywhere else. Join me live on air Sundays, Mondays, and Tuesdays for the most unique and bold talk radio in Israel.
The Tamar Yona Show.
Shalom, I'm Leah Aharoni. Join me on my show, News from the Torah. Each Sunday, we'll use the weekly Torah portion as a prism for understanding the news today. Listen to News from the Torah to gain clarity about the times we're living in and to understand your own spiritual path in the process. News from the Torah every Sunday on Israel News Talk Radio.
Hello and welcome back to Soul Talk. Leora Mandel with Rabbi David Aaron, talking about how to maintain a sense of hope when we're going through challenge and crisis and feeling overwhelmed and feeling like we're stuck. And I feel like just this first segment, there's so many powerful perspectives and practical tools, and they come hand in hand. I think sometimes we need to have the right perspective, but then as I was saying, sometimes we can have a perspective in our head, but we don't have the tools of how do I actively implement this into my life so that it's not just in my head, but I can start to have it penetrate my heart and start to have it make it feel like it's making a big difference. And with this idea of taking step by step is huge. It's so interesting that sometimes we zone in so much into details of our life, and we should zoom out and look at the bigger picture. And sometimes when we should stop looking at this big picture that seems so overwhelming, and how am I ever going to find solutions to these huge problems, or how is this ever going to end, we have to know when to zone in and say, stop looking at this huge picture. It's too overwhelming. Focus on one little piece. What can I do right now during this hour to deal with how I'm feeling right now or help this situation? Only right now in an hour is a very different perspective than thinking my life.
Yeah, that's the only way to really do things, is to realize that just like every journey is step by step, so too every spiritual journey is step by step. And just figure out the step. Now, sometimes I don't even know which direction I'm supposed to take. Move anyways. It doesn't matter what you do. It's better that you do something than nothing.
So, but here's my question. I mean, the physical moving, I think, is great and it's smart. And sometimes I think we don't always think of what is best for us when we feel stuck. So anyone who's feeling stuck or overwhelmed right now, the idea of go out and take a walk, you'll feel better. Put on some music and dance. If you can do that, you'll feel better, is so important. So often, though, when we are feeling overwhelmed, I mean, there's physical movement, but then there's making a move in our life. That's sometimes when we make mistakes. So how do we make sure, separate from physically moving, the importance of moving, as you're explaining, is so important. But if we're not in a clear thinking state of mind, how do we make sure we're, as you said, move in some direction, but how do we make sure we're not moving in a direction that might be taking us to a place that can get us deeper into our problems?
Well, you know what? Nobody has done anything of great value without making mistakes. If you don't want to make mistakes, then don't do anything. And you won't succeed, and you won't fail, but you definitely won't succeed either. Every great person who's ever done anything great has probably made some really great mistakes, because that's the price you pay when you're ready to do something. And so a person shouldn't be afraid to make a mistake. They should be afraid to not even try. And I believe that when my heart's in the right place and I really do want to do good, then I'll get guidance, I'll get help. And even if I make a mistake, then there was something I learned. And the truth is that if you learn from your mistakes, then it wasn't a mistake. It was an opportunity for growth.
And this goes back to the power of perspective. Because if I make a mistake and I feel like I failed and I feel down on myself, I can start to despair. Maybe I'm never going to be able to get things right. That's a whole direction that I start going in. That's movement in the wrong direction. But if I can, as you're saying, be in the right perspective and recognize I tried, I made a mistake, but mistake, as you said, is the price I pay for trying and for learning. And it was not a failure. This was an opportunity that I learned from. Totally different direction that I'm going in because of the perspective that I have on the movement that I took.
Right. And I think maybe sometimes we have very high expectations for ourselves that undermine us moving forward because we overwhelm ourselves with what we expect from ourselves. Recently I was speaking to somebody and they really want to help people, but felt that they are not really competent to help people because they themselves have problems that they really have to work on. I said, why is that a problem? They said, well, because I'm not one of those people that is just naturally good-hearted. I really have to work at that. I said, well, then you're the perfect person to help people because most people are struggling, and to meet somebody that struggles and works hard is real and relatable. To meet somebody who is good, was good, always will be good, some perfect person. I don't even like hanging around perfect people. I never even met one anyways. So I said, your imperfection is really an asset, that you recognize what you're struggling with and you work at it, and people can relate to that. So here's a person that's undermining their sense of fulfillment, feeling very hopeless that they can ever do anything because they set for themselves a expectation that in order to help others, they have to really have their act together. But the truth is that that's how you help others, by showing them that I too struggle and I've made mistakes also, but I keep moving forward, and such people are real and relatable.
This really goes into another big aspect of despair versus hope, and it has to do with what we tell ourselves. Because even with the man you're talking about, if he's telling himself, well, I can't be helpful to other people because look at all the mistakes I've made, then it's like this despair of what use am I? What good am I? My life has been a bunch of failures. But if I tell myself, you know what, from the mistakes that I've made, I can really relate to other people who are going through struggles and challenges. I really understand what it feels like to try and to not be successful. That's one of the reasons I can be so helpful to others. That, the dialogue we tell ourselves makes all the difference of whether or not we feel like we can be a failure or the situation is one to despair over versus that, no, there's hope.
Right. The Talmud teaches that a prisoner can't get himself out of jail. And that means that I can help people get out of their jail. I have the key to their jail, but I can't get out of my jail. And so sometimes a person feels that, my gosh, how am I going to help people with problems that I myself haven't been able to solve? And the answer is, you know what? You don't have to perform, brain surgery on yourself. Brain surgeons do surgery on other people, not on themselves. And therefore, even if you can't help yourself in a certain area that someone is asking you help in, that doesn't mean you can't help them. So very often people undermine their willingness to help people because they think, well, my gosh, how am I going to help people with that issue when I myself have that issue? The truth is that that's a strange thing, that we have the ability to help others in things that we can't help ourselves. And we have to find somebody that can help us. And everybody is in their prison and somebody else has the key.
So that brings me then to another side of this. When I'm, whether we're going through a challenge ourselves and feeling somewhat stuck or in despair, Or oftentimes we have someone in our life. Maybe we're going through a crisis. We have someone else who's going through something. How can we be there for someone else? Because I think so often, I think everyone's experienced this at some time or another. You may want to help someone else, and then you feel like you said the wrong thing, or you're not sure how to be there, so then you don't do anything. Or, I mean, when we're in a situation where someone in our life is going through a time where they're just in a black hole, what can we do? Not everyone's trained as therapists and as rabbis who really on a regular basis are helping people through their challenges. What can someone do when they have someone they're close to who's going through a tough time to be there for them?
Well, I think we can all listen. Maybe we don't have the training in terms of what we should say in response and what advice we should give, but we can listen. And very often that itself is transformational. There was a psychologist by the name of Carl Rogers, and he had a very different understanding of therapy than most therapists, whereby most therapists had take the position that you need to keep a professional distance from your client. And Carl Rogers believed just the opposite. He believed that unhealthy people are unhealthy because they have unhealthy relationships, and that the role of a therapist is to simply provide a healthy relationship. And so if, as a therapist, you're kind of avoiding a relationship and trying to keep this professional distance, you can't help the person. That was Carl Rogers' point. Now, I'm not making any comments in terms of what it means to be a therapist, but what it does mean to be a friend. That I do believe that we are our relationships, and a person who's in pain can heal just by being in a healthy relationship with somebody who is communicating care and empathy and is acting as a compassionate ear. And you don't have to give advice. Very often people just need somebody to hear them. And sometimes that's just their problem, that they haven't felt heard by anybody. And so you don't have to offer any advice. Just offering, the patients to hear them out can actually help them out.
That's such helpful advice, because again, I think I've heard from people say, sometimes I want to help and I'm just not sure how. I'm not sure the right way and the right thing, and therefore then nothing gets done. But what you're saying is so powerful. Just even a phone call saying, I'm thinking about you. Would you like to talk? It just shows that you care, and then you let the other person talk, and you don't even have to say much, so you don't have to worry about saying the wrong thing.
Yeah, I think one of the most important cures is care. Just feeling cared for is already a tremendous healing to so many people. They just feel nobody cares. And that's so devastating. So when somebody reaches out and, look, I don't know, I'm no expert. I don't know if I could give you any advice. I just want you to know I care. And if I can be a compassionate ear, please, I just let's spend some time and I want to hear how you're doing. That itself is healing.
And especially when we're talking about trying to maintain a sense of hope instead of despair, as you're saying, care, someone feeling cared for, and my ability to say, I don't know what to do for you. So therefore, instead of saying I'll do nothing, understanding if I care about you, whatever I do that shows care, whether it be calling you, sending you a message, dropping something, some home-baked cookies off, all of those things are very actively doing something to be there for the other person. And those are the kinds of things that really can help a person who is going through some despair have some sense of hope just by feeling cared for. When we return, Soul Talk, Rabbi David Aaron and Leora Mandel.
In a time where feelings have become fact, where rational thought and common sense has disappeared, one man stands above it all.
I'm Howie Sobiker, your political hitman.
Political Hitman airs every Tuesday at 11:59 p.m. North American time, 7 a.m. Israeli time, only on Israel News Talk Radio.
Are you interested in transforming your life, drawing closer to the Creator, and uncovering the deeper meanings and hidden treasures in the Hebrew Bible?
Then join me, Rav Yitzhak Michelson,
and me, William Hall,
on the Science of Kabbalah, where we are seeking to narrow the gap between what we understand of our physical and spiritual worlds. So make sure to tune in every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Israel time, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, here on Israel News Talk Radio.
Hello and welcome back to Soul Talk. Leora Mandel with Rabbi David Aaron, talking about how to maintain a sense of hope during times of challenge and struggle. And I want to go back to something we spoke about actually at the very beginning. You mentioned, and I've been thinking about this throughout, that when we feel like things are going wrong and things are bad, it's often because we had hope and expectations of how things would work out and should work out according to our estimation. And life isn't always that way. God has other plans for us, and it doesn't mean that it's bad. It's just we don't see it as good because it's not what we were hoping for ourselves. And that is this challenge, I think, when we're in a sense of despair or in a feeling like we're stuck, is how do we have, like, we want to have faith in God, but the reality is that not everything always works out the way we want it to. And not, like, say if a person's ill, that doesn't mean I'm going to get better or my loved one is going to get better. And it doesn't mean my finances, if I'm in a really financial crunch, are going to resolve. They might, but knowing that not everything will work out the way I'm hoping it will. How do we readjust our mindset to not despair and still be able to find a sense of calm, knowing, as we're saying, God's running the show, but that doesn't mean it's going to work out the way I want it to?
Well, as I mentioned before, it does take tremendous amount of humility to be able to say that the way I envision things turning out isn't necessarily the best way, even though it seems to me it would be the best way. What do we know? And it takes a tremendous amount of humility to say, God is the master of the universe. There is clearly infinite wisdom that went into creating every detail of this planet. Why should I assume that that wisdom suddenly disappeared when it comes to forming and guiding my life? And to be humble and patient and trust that Hashem is sending me the ultimate good, even though it might not look like it right now in the near future.
So to a great extent, then, part of having faith is accepting what is, even if what is isn't what I want, as opposed to fighting what is.
It says in Pirkei Avot, in the chapters of our fathers, Aseh Ratzono Ritzoncha, want what God wants. And that will be the secret happiness. If I want what God wants, then I accept what's happening and I want it. But most people are functioning on getting God to want what they want. And we need to work on getting us to want what he wants. And it's a lot of work. I'm not saying I'm so such an expert at that yet either. It does take work. But I don't think of any other work to do because, whenever you argue with reality, you never win. Mm-hmm. And so, reality is reality. And the best thing to do is to embrace it. And I think that's the way you get elevated by it.
So now this brings me to another question, because on the one hand, I'm thinking, yes, there's times that I'm saying, and I'm hearing from you, that we have to accept this is what is. And if it's different than what I wanted, I will stop feeling so down and stuck, so to speak, if I can accept and start change, accepting this new reality. On the other hand, there's certain aspects of life where it's like I specifically feel stuck. When do I feel stuck? When I feel like there's nothing I can do. This is what it is. I can't change this situation. I don't have control, and therefore I feel stuck. And how do we know when to accept and when to say, I need to do what I can, what can I change, as opposed to saying, well, this must be what God wants for me and I have to accept it, and I will stop feeling stuck by not trying to change everything that can't be changed.
Right. Well, I don't believe there's one answer that fits all. It's every situation, every human being is different, and we need to look at it and try and strategize. Is it, like there's a saying, winners never quit and quitters never win. But I heard a wise teaching from a man named Seth Godin who said that he disagrees with that principle. He believes that winners know when to quit. when it's time to quit and go do something else. And so this whole idea of winners never quit and quitters never win, it's not true. Sometimes a winner is somebody who knows when it's time to quit and do something else. But how does a person know that? When is it time to be persistent? When is it time to make it happen? And when is it time to let go? Everybody's different. Every situation is different. It's actually the story of Abraham. When Abraham is informed that Hashem, God, is going to destroy Sodom, he argues with God. He prays, he argues, he bargains. He demonstrates tremendous amount of chutzpah, assertiveness in the face of the divine. And he goes to bat for a community filled with evil people. But when God says, sacrifice your son, we don't hear anything from him. He doesn't argue. He doesn't pray for his own son. And that just goes to show that there is no one answer that fits all. Somehow, Avram had the intuition and the clarity that when it came to Sodom, he could and he should fight to save that country, that city. But when it came to his son, somehow he knew that this was a time to surrender. So how to know when it's time to assert and be relentless and persistent? And when is it time to let go and let God and accept? I don't know. Everybody needs to figure that out at that time.
Although, I am thinking when you're talking about the importance of movement so that we don't get stuck. So obviously there's movement of, well, let me see what I can do to change the situation. That we're used to as being movement. But as I'm thinking about it, acceptance isn't just giving up and saying, well, there's nothing I can do, so I just have to accept it. I would call it almost what you're describing as a working acceptance, because you said it's a lot of work to accept. Meaning that's a different kind of acceptance than a passive acceptance. So even when it is the time to surrender and accept, if it's coming from a place of movement, of working acceptance, that part of what I need to do is I can't change the situation, so I need to change myself actively to accept that this is what God wants for me right now. If that's the right thing to do, then that's also movement. And then I'm not falling into a place of despair because I'm still moving.
Yeah, I know it takes tremendous strength. I mean, I have a friend who's been bedridden for probably a decade. And I regularly, he doesn't live in Israel. I regularly call him. And I never hear him complain. Never. And he's in pain. And I say to him, it's amazing how you have the trust in Hashem and God, and you accept your situation. And he says, well, he just starts talking about all the positive things in his life, but he's bedridden. And so that's tremendous strength of character to be able to accept what is and not complain, but focus on what is in the positive and accept what is in the negative.
Well, that part right there is huge, because I think when we feel like a sense of despair and we feel stuck, it's because the challenge and the problem that we have feels like it's our whole life, as opposed to what it sounds like your friend is this amazing ability to do is his challenge could be his whole life, but what he's done is he's pulled, but this is the time we're talking about you focus in or pull back. He's pulled back and seen this is a part of my life, but when you're saying he'll focus on the blessings that he has, those things are also in his life, and because he's choosing to focus on them, he doesn't despair because the challenge isn't the only thing that is facing him. He has other things in the picture of his life, and that's what he's choosing to focus on, so that's where he is, that's where his mind is, that's where his thoughts are.
Yeah, well, not that it's easy, but that's really in many ways the choice of all choice, which is the choice of what you're going to focus on and your attitude. And it's not easy, but very often that's really the only choice you have is the choice of attitude. There's nothing you can do about the situation, but there is something you can do, which is change the way you think about it.
And then that's really then the source for hope in any situation. Because even in a situation that it won't change, say a person's lost a loved one, that person will not be coming back. But the way I think about any situation can make the difference if I'm going to remain in a sense of despair or find some ability to have hope and build on that hope. So, but in a big sense, it's a choice we have to. I mean, is that a choice? Yeah, I guess it's a choice we have to make. Am I going to choose? Obviously, sometimes one choice is much easier than the other, but there always is that choice. Am I going to choose? I'm thinking of your friend, because most people aren't struggling with what he's struggling with, and it's a lifelong situation where he has to make this choice. Am I going to choose to focus on despair of everything I've lost, or am I going to choose to focus on the blessings that I do have?
Right. And I think it's important, like, it's very hard to choose your thoughts. Thoughts just drop into our head. And to stop a thought sometimes just feeds a thought. But you can choose what you're going to say. And so even if you have negative thoughts, talk a positive talk. And that you can control what you say. It's hard to control what you think because thoughts just pop into our heads. At the very least, talk a positive talk, talk a optimistic talk, and I think that will have an influence on us.
That's actually so huge. Because again, what you're pointing out, and it's so true, it's so hard for us to control our thoughts, but we can have more control over what we say. And I think so often it's like it starts out with a choice. I want to be, let's say, a more positive person. But I don't even know what things I should be saying. But in a sense, if I very consciously try to come up with certain mantras, certain things I'm going to tell myself even, I don't have to tell anyone else, every single day I'm going to wake up and the first thing I'm going to say is, well, this is what we do. Modeh ani lefanecha. Thank God for a new day. But if I'm going to give it some thought, and I choose even a few mantras that are things I'm going to start saying to myself, and then slowly we can build on that. It really is a way to transform and create a sense of the movement that we need in our life to really go from a place where even if I'm going through major struggles and challenge, moving from this point of despair towards this point of hope and recognizing, creating this sense of optimism through the perspective that I'm hopefully choosing to take, and then the words that I'm going to say that are going to create that reality, more of that around me. I want to thank you all for joining us, Soul Talk, Rabbi David Aaron and Leora Mandel.
Where can you get the inside news on Israel? At Israel News Talk Radio, we're dedicated to sharing Israel's inside story with the world by providing our listeners with news on Israeli politics, current affairs, and Israeli Jewish culture. The Israel News Talk Radio homepage also provides you, the listener, with useful information at your fingertips, with scrolling news headlines, weather, currency exchange, Shabbat candlelighting times, and so much more. Our radio programming is always accessible and on demand. We operate absolutely free of charge for everyone, everywhere. If you love what we do, partner with us now by becoming an Israel News Talk Radio supporter. With your support, you'll be inscribed on our Israel News Talk Radio Wall of Fame. There's nothing like us in the world. Be part of something great. Israel News Talk Radio. Straight talk from Israel.
Howdy, this is Rita from League City, Texas, now living in Israel. And though my heart may have belonged to Texas, it now belongs to Israel and all the fantastic show hosts at Israel News Talk Radio.
Hi, this is Michael Solomon from Kiryat Arba, Israel. And why do I love listening to Israel News Talk Radio? Because I love listening to the interesting interviews they do and their news reporting that most other media sources don't cover.
Hey, this is Nicoleko from Malmö, Sweden. It gets pretty cold here in Sweden, so I love cuddling up with a warm cup of tea while I listen to Israel News Talk Radio.
Hey everybody, this is Frank Morris from Tennessee. Me and my dog Buster really love listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.